Well, good morning. This is Ian R. Crane. It's the morning of Thursday, 14th of December 2017. And this is the morning live stream coming to you from the edge of Dartmoor here in the southwest of England. And the reason I'm down here is that tonight I shall be broadcasting episode 100 of Humanity versus Insanity. And at 7:30 and at 9 o'clock, episode 114 or maybe 115, I can't remember which, of Fracking Nightmare. Now, it's been a while since I've been in the studio down here in Plymouth. So tonight, episode 100, we're going to take a look at all of the symptoms that would indicate that the UK is rushing headlong into a totalitarian corporatist state. Now, most people associate totalitarianism with a dictator, but this is a little bit more subtle. It's so subtle that the vast majority of people don't actually realize what's occurring. And yet INEOS are at the forefront of this rush towards corporate totalitarianism, where the corporations effectively ride roughshod over the prevailing legislation and certainly have zero respect for democracy. And we'll be looking at that in a little bit more detail tonight on Humanity versus Insanity. And if you want to tune into that, that will go out on the UK Column Live YouTube channel at 7:30 tonight. And then at 9 o'clock, we'll be going live with the last episode of the year of Fracking Nightmare. And, I have to say, it does look like we're going to end 2017 as the 5th frack-free year in the UK since the moratorium was lifted almost exactly 5 years ago in December of 2012. But we're not out of the woods by any stretch of the imagination, because the combination of what I've just said, the headlong rush into a totalitarian corporatist state, is there for all who have time to put down their smartphones and actually take a look at what is occurring in terms of the bigger picture. So a relatively short transmission this morning, as we'll be looking at some of the issues in more depth tonight. But 5 years ago, when I was doing the Fractured Future tour around the UK, and which I was doing in the first half of 2013, 63 dates around the country to try and put fracking into the wider consciousness. And of course the purpose was to stimulate people's curiosity, to say, look, take a look at this, because this is what is coming unless we actually get involved, and it will rush headlong into our backyards unless we actually develop a community opposition. And of course that's why this unstructured anti-fracking movement, it's a community that is linked through social media and obviously other means of networking as well. So if social media does go down for whatever reason, the network will still be able to sustain itself. And the beauty of this is that there is no leadership, there is no national committee, and it is built of literally hundreds of sovereign, independent, autonomous community groups supported by many, many individuals and also the NGOs. So the government and the establishment have no idea where the next response is coming from, and neither do we, because it's organic. And this is, basically what makes this really so exciting. Also, of course, for the industry and the government, makes it so frustrating. But 5 years ago, when I was doing the tour, I talked about mission creep. I made it very clear that this is an industry that works on the basis that, number one, it's easier to ask for forgiveness than it is to ask for permission. But number two, they will make application based on what they think they can get away with. So they will make application based on the bare minimum footprint, the bare minimum impact on the community where they are trying to actually establish their presence. But once they've got that permission, then what we would see is the mission creep. A bit of escalation here, a bit of escalation there. And this is exactly what we're seeing now. So a few days ago, I made the observation that Third Energy have now admitted that they will not be processing any of the flowback that they get from their their test frac jobs at Kirby Misperton. This is, of course, BARCLAYS BANK, trading as Third Energy at Kirby Misperton. But they will have to dispose of that waste. Now, in the original application, they claimed that they were going to be able to process that on site and then reuse it. And at the time, I said, this is a complete crock. That is just not a viable proposition. And the expertise to do this just doesn't exist. They have to use fresh water. Well, Cuadrilla, of course, had actually made exactly the same observation, that they were going to reuse much of the frac fluid, and thereby minimize the amount of waste that the site would generate. That, of course, now has been shut down because Cuadrilla have effectively acknowledged that they can't do that. And now this is a bit of a problem because the waste that will be generated from Prestonley Road is significantly more than the waste that will be generated from Kirby Misperton. And effectively, Cuadrilla, in their application to amend their planning permission, their terms and conditions with Lancashire County Council, have not only acknowledged that they cannot process it on site, they've actually acknowledged that they don't know what they're going to do with it. Now, the maximum fluids that Cuadrilla are going to be able to maintain on site is something like about 660,000 gallons. And they have permission to frack up to, I think it's 760 odd cubic meters, which is, very, very significant amount. I mean, obviously it's less than the 1,000 cubic meters that will determine a frack as per the Infrastructure Act. But 760 odd cubic meters is still around about 180,000 gallons. And this was allegedly the maximum amount that they had permission to pump on a single day. But that's also now been amended. So here we go, mission creep. And of course, another element of mission creep is the flaring. And now Cuadrilla have effectively gained permission to flare for a total of 360 days. And guess who's going to monitor it? Oh yeah, that's right, Cuadrilla, marking their own homework. Now, if all that wasn't bad enough, then another application submitted is to literally dump rainwater from the pad onto the surrounding meadows. Now, this is an admission by Cuadrilla that basically they do not have the capacity to store the amount of rainwater that manifests on that site, assuming it is all rainwater and it's not water that's actually coming up from a pressurized aquifer. But they can't get rid of it. So now what they're saying is, look, we just basically want to dump it on adjoining farmland. But who's going to monitor? Who's going to monitor whether or not the surface water on the pad has actually been contaminated by anything on the pad? That's precisely why the pads have a liner, so that the pad can supposedly keep all fluids that come onto the pad separate from anything that goes onto the adjoining land. So once again, this is an absurd piece of mission creep. And, basically, if this is permitted, then what it does is it effectively makes a mockery of the liner because, it's just there in name only. It's not actually going to serve any useful purpose if the surface water isn't directed into the designated storage tanks. So here we go, mission creep. And, of course, there's another piece of mission creep, and that is that Cuadrilla have now managed to get permission to bring convoys in at night, claiming that they need to do this because of the likely increase in protector activity. But, supposedly it's going to be limited to one night in every 3 months, and limited to, I believe it's 70 truck movements in that one night. So there you go. That, I guess, is the green light for the Preston Road protection community to set up their night watch, because you have one night, sometime over the next 3 months or so, to spot that convoy and do whatever needs to be done. Because basically, all you're left with is civil disobedience. Peaceful civil disobedience. But which, of course, you know, would be normally quite acceptable if we were upholding Articles 10 and 11, if we were upholding, you know, the right to assembly, the right to freedom of speech, and there was any democratic process. But what you're seeing is the systematic erosion of democratic process, so that the corporations can literally ride roughshod over the communities. And we come back to INEOS over the other side of the Pennines, and INEOS have now succeeded in effectively getting the Secretary of State to agree that their applications to establish well sites at Hart Hill and Marsh Lane in North Derbyshire / South Yorkshire, that will now be decided by public inquiry. Now, the reason that INEOS are effectively taking the local authorities out of the equation is because they claim that the local authorities have been somewhat tardy in dealing with their application. But this is disingenuous, to say the least, because in fact it's INEOS that actually requested a delay, because they got wind that the planning officer was likely to recommend to the planning committee that the applications be rejected. So what they decided to do was ask for a delay so that they could revise their application. But what they were really doing was seeking to find ways to get around the local authority, come in through the back door and come in via public inquiry. Obviously on the basis that they believe that a public inquiry is likely to give a more favourable decision. And of course Jim Ratcliffe, who has currently shut down the Forties pipeline, which he acquired just literally the final deal was wrapped up a few weeks ago, although it was announced in April that they were seeking to make this acquisition. But you know, you can just imagine a situation where Jim Ratcliffe turns round to Greg Clark and says, "Now, Greg, you know, you obviously want to see hydrocarbons flow onto mainland UK. You don't really want to be in a situation where your political career is at risk because it's you that perhaps has been somewhat remiss in helping us to get the application that we need to frack in North Derbyshire and South Yorkshire. And in return, well, you know what, we'll keep the pipeline open and we won't find any more hairline cracks, causing it to shut down for a few weeks." And as I've alluded to in the past broadcast, putting this degree of infrastructure in the hands of a single wannabe oligarch, I mean, it looks like Jim Ratcliffe wants to become the UK version of Roman Abramovich. You know, he wants to be a hydrocarbons oligarch. Well, and the British government seem to be facilitating that by not stopping him from his rampant acquisition of essential UK infrastructure. Hopefully not essential for too much longer, because the hydrocarbon-driven economy is in its twilight years. Unfortunately, the twilight years might be lasting a little bit longer than we might actually prefer. But nonetheless, we are in those twilight years, and these sociopaths will want to try and literally hold the country and hold the government and certainly local authorities to absolute ransom to maximise whatever return they can eke out of these twilight years, you know, for their own personal benefit. And as I've alluded to, Jim Ratcliffe has a reported personal wealth in excess of £5.5 billion. He's certainly not short of a buck or three, and of course he's not short of a yacht or two, considering the fact that he blackmailed the British government into giving him 134 million just a few years ago to keep the Grangemouth refinery open. And no doubt he's currently working on a plan to maybe get another yacht or another jet or another significant property to add to his portfolio, and he's just trying to work out what the angle will be to squeeze this money out of the British government, out of the British taxpayer, to keep the Forties pipeline open and bringing hydrocarbons on shore. So if you don't know what we're dealing with by now, then, well, you must have your head buried deep in a pile of something. But, this is a government that relies on our apathy. And even if we do have any idea of what's occurring, it relies on us just not wanting to get involved. Oh, don't have time. And, the old response is, well, what can you do? It's the government. They'll do it if they want to do it. No, they'll do it if you or I let them. If they think they can just ride roughshod over us, then they will do it. But, one way or another, this growing community has prevented any frack on British soil for the last 5 years. And in the meantime, Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland, and I'm pleased to say the Republic of Ireland have all found very creative ways to ensure that this insidious industry never gets a foothold within their jurisdiction. But unfortunately, in England, we are simply allowing our government to ride roughshod over us and railroad this industry into our communities. Now, I'm sure it's not over by any stretch of the imagination. Greg Clark still has not signed off on the frack for Barclays Bank at Kirby Misperton. So there's definitely got to be something giving him cause for concern. And no doubt a few Freedom of Information requests will ultimately reveal what it is that is giving him cause for concern. And as I suggested yesterday, he's desperately trying to dodge this political grenade. And we'll be talking more about the absurd obfuscation, the smoke and mirrors of the Oil and Gas Authority, which people are supposed to believe has been set up to actually protect them from the most insidious of the oil and gas industry's practices. In reality, it's there to push it through. And we'll be looking at how it's structured, who owns the stock, and who effectively, ultimately, is, despite not wanting to put his name on the bottom line, will have his name on the bottom line. And you've guessed it, yes, it's Greg Clark. And you know what, Greg, you will not be getting off the hook. So the names that have to be on everybody's lips over the coming weeks are Greg Clark, Secretary of State for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, Dr. Andy Samuel, the Chief Executive of the Oil and Gas Authority, who was previously for 20 years with BG Group. And of course, BG Group, as the owner of QGC, have fracked the bejesus out of southern Queensland. So what do you think he's intending to facilitate here in the UK? And of course, James Arthur Ratcliffe, the owner of INEOS, the Swiss company that is on point to drive or be the spearhead for the erosion of democracy in the UK and the rapid arrival of a corporate-dominated totalitarian state where the corporation has absolute priority over the private citizen and priority over all resources. And if that doesn't give you cause for concern, then it really should. And if not for yourself, then for the legacy that it will leave and we will be leaving for future generations. So, time to get involved. Time to take a look at this for yourself. Because the government relies on the fact that people think, oh, what can you do? They'll do it anyway. That's exactly what they want you to think. They know fine well that if there were 2, 3, 4, 500 people, a fraction of 1% of the population of North Yorkshire, if those people had actually been down at the gates of KM8 every day since September the 25th. It will all be over now, and you know, I'd be out playing golf or something this morning. But that's a luxury that I am not prepared to go for and enjoy until such time as we've put the final nail in the coffin of this insidious industry. So join me tonight on Humanity versus Insanity at 7:30 on the UK Column Live YouTube channel, and again at 9 o'clock on the same channel for this final episode of 2017 of Fracking Nightmare. So thanks again for joining me this morning. Thanks again for following me through the week. I'm still in Facebook jail on the Ian Rowland Crane Facebook account. So if you do have access to this video, then please share it around and get it outside of the anti-fracking community. It's, you know, everyone who's part of the anti-fracking community is probably very well aware of everything I'm sharing with you. The challenge is to push this information outside of the existing community to bring in new blood, new creativity, new initiative. You know, somebody who hasn't yet become part of the anti-fracking community may actually hold the key to finding the Achilles heel and shutting this down once and for all. So it's just starting to rain. Actually, the temperature's starting to drop, so it might even be about to snow again. But so I'm going to get back in the warm, have a cup of tea and some porridge, and get ready for this evening's broadcast. So thanks again, and catch up with you tomorrow morning at 8:30 if you missed the shows tonight. See you then.